Hello, this is Callan from Authentic Lifestyle Design, and today I want to talk to you and introduce a model to you called Spiral Dynamics. So, this is a model of developmental psychology and it focuses on the different stages of development we human beings go through. So, a lot of people think we just develop, and biologically we do, from a baby to an adult and then we get old, but psychologically, there's also pathways that we follow as we develop. And the majority of people never get to the pinnacle of models such as spiral dynamics. So it's not a perfect model, no model is, but it's a really good lens and it's a really good way to look at people as they move through life. And for that reason, I see tremendous value in it, to the extent where I decided to make this PowerPoint so I could go into the model in a lot of detail. So yeah, we have what's called horizontal personal development. So that is essentially developing across or using your current belief systems and the current things you think of, your goals that exist now, and you try to actualize those. But then we also have what's called vertical personal development. Now, vertical personal development is actually shifting and changing those belief systems in order to achieve, I guess, a higher state of being or more happiness in your life. So at the end of the day, you don't have to climb a model like this. You might find a stage that works really well for you, but the potential's there. And from my experience of studying this model for the last 5 years or so, my life has gotten better and I have grown as a human being as I've worked up and discovered what we call vertical personal development. So what is spiral dynamics? It's a theory of development psychology. It was developed by Professor Beck and Cowen, based off a thing called emergent cyclical theory, which was developed by a guy named Professor Clare Graves. So essentially, Clare Graves developed this theory in the early stages and all this. He passed on, and after that, Beck and Cowen, who both worked very closely with this guy, they took his research and developed it into this more formal model. It's actually based off Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is a similar but much simpler model, and it just expands upon that in a lot of ways. So, here's the overview of spiral dynamics. You have 8 stages in the model, and they go from very basic and they increase in complexity each time, and they build on top of each other. So those being beige, purple, red, blue, orange, green, yellow, and turquoise. The reason they're colors is because Cowen and Beck wanted to essentially highlight that you're not better if you're at a higher level. It doesn't make you a better person, right? They're just different lenses or different ways of looking at the world. And in order for the world to function properly, you kind of need people to be at all these different stages. And you'll see that as we go through, and you'll understand how deep this really goes, as there's a lot of substance to it. So we're going to walk through them. Here's some things to consider before we start. So stages move from an individual focus to a group focus. So meaning beige, which is our first stage, that focuses on the self, or just you, the current character you are now. Whilst when you move into a group focus, you're not focusing on you anymore, not as heavily anyway, you're focusing on a group and being a part of that group. So another thing is that stress can cause people to temporarily move down stages. So say if you're at like the 5th stage, you get really stressed, it might move you down to the 3rd stage temporarily. So generally you start at a certain point and the stress will lower you. But often after that stress goes away, you'll bounce back, right? Okay, so there's 2 tiers, which we'll get into later. Just remember at the moment that they're different. So the 1st stage through to the 6th stage is our 1st tier, and then our 7th and 8th stage are our 2nd tier, which introduces, I guess, what's called 3-dimensional thinking or more open-minded thinking. Each stage has its own place in the world, like I said before, and every stage has its own pros and cons, even turquoise, which is the highest stage. There's pros and cons of each. As you integrate the model, you try and pull from more pros and less cons as you work. And over time, you can use this model to develop into an extraordinary human being, and I find it to be a highly beneficial lens to possess. It's a really interesting way of looking at the world and societies and cultures and politics and whatever else you want to use it for. So, let's get started. Our first stage we have is Beige. So, Beige is our most basic fundamental level. This level focuses on basic survival needs, so food, water, shelter, and safety, and to an extent maybe reproduction. It can depend. So babies are at Beige. When you're born, you're at Beige. A baby cries when it's hungry, it cries when it wants something. That's about all it knows, right? Or animals are at Beige because they're acting on an instinctual basis, and Beige is very instinctual. Like, let's say an example of a grown person falling into Beige is fight or flight, where all of a sudden you're acting instinctively, because when you're in fight or flight, you're not consciously making decisions, you're just reacting and trying to survive, and that's very primitive and that's ingrained into you. So about 0.01% of the adult population operate at Beige permanently, and this is really people who lack that frontal cortex in their brain, or people that essentially lack the human part of being human. So a human being at Beige would essentially be acting animalistic or purely based off instinct. So what happens at Beige, which is survival alone, is you can move into the next stage of Purple, which is survival in a group. So this is our tribal stage, where a bunch of people start surviving together. So this is where individuals aren't on an individual Beige level anymore, where they're trying to survive. Now they're a part of a tribe, and they live and they try to survive for that group. So now they're a member of the tribe, and they would live for the tribe, meaning they would die for their tribe. They will put their tribe before themselves anytime. So they also start to get a bit curious about understanding the world. So they're going to believe in magic and spirits and spells and mythological stories and all these things, because generally at this point, knowledge is passed through storytelling or through elders that grew up in experience and then pass on that knowledge either through paintings or through storytelling or other means. And about 10% of the global population operate at Purple, and this is mainly people still living a tribal existence. So, wherever in the world, undiscovered tribes in the Amazon and places like that. There's actually a lot of tribes in the world. If you look into it, I think every continent except Antarctica still has tribes living on it, so it's incredible. And Purple has about 1% of the global influence. So that's meaning the power or the influence on the world stage. About 1% of that currently is at Purple. Now, think of it this level. You were in survival, now you're survival in a group. Then maybe you discover power, right? And with power, sometimes you might want to lead the group, or you might realize that you can do things that will benefit you. So Purple, we're thinking group. We've gone from individual to group. Now we go to our next stage, which is Red, which moves us back into individualism. So here's where we understand power. Here's where we understand that our actions can have a result, and that we can use power and force to get what we want. And we can use that to control other people. We can use that to acquire resources, to take someone else's resources if we have to. And it's a much more aggressive way than Purple. So a lot of leaders of these Purple tribes might actually be at Red, and they might utilize the tribe to meet their needs, whilst also looking after that tribe. And it's might and force. So this is also the stage of the warrior. So think your cliche, like Spartans who just live for war and the glory in war, or the Vikings or other warriors like this. That's a strong level of Red. They focus on power, might, and force. They will use force to achieve goals, and they usually want instant gratification. So they're not thinking long term. They're thinking, that guy has something I want. He's defenseless. I'm going to go take that. if they see that opportunity, red will usually act on it. Okay, so they're individually focused and the ego begins to develop. So they're not just in survival now, there's more complexity to it. So here's where the sense of self truly begins to separate from the tribe, and where that sense of self becomes individual, and where you start to develop an individual ego or an individual personality sense of self. About 20% of the global population operate at this stage, but a lot of those people are in the developing world and places where the survival conditions are a lot harder than they are here in the West, if you're listening to this in a Western country. And red has about 5% of the global influence. So about 5% of the pool on the world stage is at red. But what happens at red, it works in small groups because someone has power, say some dictators controlling a bunch of people, and that works for a small group. But once you move into a larger group, you would essentially get a bunch of people at red and they'd all be fighting each other. So it would essentially be warring tribes or warring clans, something along those lines. So generally what happens is people get together and they start to develop mutual rules and mutual hierarchies that everybody respects and that the society enforces. At this point, people move into what's called blue. This is our next stage. So blue is really focused on order and has a group focus. So red was individual, now we're moving into blue. Now we're thinking in a group again. If you're a citizen at blue, you'd probably die for your country or whatever else it is. Now purple was your tribe, that was the group. Blue's gone bigger now. Blue is like your larger community, or blue could be your country or your state or something else that you're affiliated with, your religion, something along those lines. Blue is very hierarchical. Often they believe in some higher power that is absolute and cannot be questioned, and the rules are very rarely questioned. The rules are very set in stone. Breaking the rules can result in consequences. You might be kicked out of the group, or you might even be killed. So it's still thinking pretty extreme, and blue thinks in black and white. It's like there is a right way to do things and there is a wrong way to do things. Think of example, the push of like 1950s in the West, when everyone, were living these lives and you had to do this, you had to do this, this was the right way to live, this was the wrong way to live. And if you chose to separate from the crowd, you were often seen as strange or weird or out of touch or something like that, or even potentially dangerous. Like you think of rock music that broke a lot of the rules, and you can see the reaction to that. Alright. And people at blue play their role in society. So say if they're a police officer, or if their dad's a police officer, maybe they become a police officer. They live their lives as a police officer. It's black and white, right? They go to church, they're a Christian, they believe fully in the Christian faith. It's absolute. Nothing else could be correct, and that's the absolute way to do things. They get really locked in to one way of doing things. So the two examples I thought of here were religion, or like Christian religion, especially maybe a couple hundred years ago, and then also the military, or the structure and the hierarchies in the military. Another example I thought of is traditional martial arts, because I'm in that world, and there's a lot of blue in traditional martial arts where it's very hierarchical and very rigid, and there's very strict rules, there's a certain way you do things and all the rest of that. So about 40% of the global population are at this level, and it holds about 30% of the global influence. Now there's blue everywhere, there's blue all over the world. Every country's going to have some blue. In the West you see it, but you're starting to see it a little bit less now, especially in the younger generations. So when you're in this blue group mentality, it's similar to purple, like you're in the tribe, but now you're in blue, you're in the community. Then one day maybe you decide you want to climb the hierarchy or be at the top of the hierarchy, because you realize that there's a lot of rewards and a lot of incentives, and there's a lot you'll get if you climb up there. So people begin to move into what's called orange, right, which is our next level. One thing I might mention, there's pitfalls to all these levels. I'll come back to that though. So orange is we're moving from the group back into the individual, right? meaning that now it's egocentric again, it's self-centered. When blue was community-centered, it was all the best for the community. Orange is now back to it's all the best for me. I'm going to climb, I'm going to be the best, I'm going to be the ultimate, right? So they're really rationalist and they're really scientific. You can't get orange to believe something unless you basically show it to them and put it in front of their face. So they kind of discount a lot of the beliefs of blue. They see blue like they're sheep or like they're conformists. And orange are trying to climb out of that pit, and orange are trying to climb up and become the ultimate, become one of the people that makes the big decisions and that gets a lot of the rewards. So this is moving from that herd mentality back into pure individualism. They have a really strong drive to become successful and stand out from the crowd. They want recognition, they want success, they want riches, but they also want other people to recognize them as being successful and as having done amazing things. About 30% of the global population are at this stage, and there's orange all over the world. And orange holds about 50% of the global influence. A lot of the people running the world are at orange, because orange is really that stage where people do want to climb to the top, where they want to be the CEOs, where they want to hustle, where they want to really get up to the top and get a lot of society's resources and a lot of the pool. And they want to show that off. They want to come across as being not necessarily better than everyone else, but in a way they do. Yeah, it kind of depends. But you're highly individualist here. Things are really important. Stuff is really important. Success is really important. Being recognized is really important, right? So, once you get to orange, generally, if you move on to the next stage, because a lot of people stay at blue or orange, there's no guarantee you'll get up to the top of this model. A lot of people stagnate at some point. But once you move out of orange, you move into a collectivist point of view again, which is green. So it's no longer individual, it's now group focused again. Except it's not your community now, it's the whole planet. It's all of Earth, right? You're world centric, you become very globalist in the way you think. So at green, relationships become far more important than material things. And they're far less flowy, they're way less structured. So green can essentially be much more open about their feelings, and they really learn how to feel properly, which is super important. Green isn't really interested in climbing the hierarchy anymore, at least not the same hierarchies as orange. They really couldn't care less about the hierarchy. Plenty of green even just move out of society and create some kind of alternative community and really do their own thing. Plus, they try to have a big heart, they try to care for all things, and sometimes they take that really far. So they really care openly for all people, but also all animals and all other living things. Green's when you really start to do that, not because it's the right thing to do, but because you genuinely feel it. About 10% of the global population are at this stage, though in Western countries and Scandinavian countries and things like that, there is a lot more than that. And green holds about 15% of the global influence, but again, it's probably higher than that in Western countries. Especially, you see them getting very passionate, and you see things like protests and different things like that, where they really try to push the rights and to make the world a better place for everybody. Now, what happens to green? Because at all these stages, you'll see limitations when you're there. You go back to an individual point of view again. But remember what I said about tier 1 and tier 2. So these first 6 stages were at tier 1. But now we're going into what's called tier 2. So each of those stages in tier 1, they have a very specific worldview and very specific belief systems at each of those viewpoints, right? Now, people in tier 2 start to think more openly, and they can hold multiple perspectives at the same time. This allows them to think 3-dimensionally, meaning there isn't just a right and wrong way to live and a right and wrong way to do things. It becomes a lot more flexible and a lot more open than that. And because of that, they try to incorporate all the positives from all the previous stages, regardless of if they know spiral dynamics or not. They understand that we're all individuals, that we all have our own paths, that we all have our own lives, and that you don't have to convert everyone to think the way you think. Because there's this massive clash in the lower stages where you try to do that. And they all think they're right. And essentially they move up and they all think their point of view is correct. So I'll go through some of the pitfalls before we go into tier 2. So beige is just pure survival. Now, purple is going to have pitfalls of essentially closed-mindedness. You're not going to be open to people outside of your tribe and probably won't even trust them. Red is you're going to use power and you're going to be very destructive and you're probably going to hurt a lot of people and potentially yourself because you're going to be very spontaneous. Blue in a way where it's all black and white. So if someone disagrees with you, you can get violent, and there's whole wars about that. Two people have clashing ideologies of blue. They believe in different gods or something, and that can result in a massive loss of life and full-scale wars just because people disagree with each other. Orange is essentially messing other people up to climb the hierarchy. It's like a dog-eat-dog kind of world where they'll throw someone under the bus if it's going to project them up to a higher level. And then green, it's dropping the logic aspect a little bit. So it's being too emotionally driven and not being logical enough and not thinking things through. So they have a lot of ideas, but they don't really think through the ramifications of those ideas as effectively. But at yellow, you see less of this. There's still pitfalls, but you see less of these big ones. And all these big ones usually result in depression, and they're usually a catalyst for someone moving to the next stage. But the first one we have is yellow. So yellow compared to these first 6 is a really high state, and not many people on the planet are here. It's very flexible and it integrates elements of all stages in the spiral before it. It's also really academic and chases knowledge. Yellow wants to know everything and wants to know as much as possible. It's important to yellow that it is able to self-actualize in this way, because you're really operating, if you have the privilege of being at yellow, you really are operating more from self-actualization at this point. They are highly independent and they usually seek social freedom. So what I mean by social freedom is they don't usually want other people to control how they live and what they do. They usually want the freedom and independence to study what they want, to do what they want for work, and to have the level of freedom to remain flexible. So kind of like green, where minimalism becomes popular, at yellow, minimalism is also popular. So yellow wants what orange wants. It wants money and success and all these things, but for different reasons. It doesn't really care if people recognize them for it. It just wants social freedom. It just wants, this is where lifestyle design, which is what this channel's based about, becomes really important, because at this point you can design a really custom life, a really interesting life, and you can pull from so many different places, even if they conflict with each other. You can see a little bit of truth and a little bit of rubbish in everything, which is always a fantastic way to look at the world. So they're really flexible. And about 1% of the global population are at this level, and yellow holds about 5% of the global influence. So globally it's 1%. In the West, maybe it's a little bit higher. Maybe it's like 3% or something like that. I'm only guessing. But yellow, you're at this really high state where you can think openly, and yellow will explore. And they'll explore things that previous stages wouldn't have, because you have very limited beliefs compared to yellow, those first 6 stages, and once you're in yellow, you can look back. For example, green really doesn't like red for quite obvious reasons. Green's all about peace. Red's all about, not violence, but power, force. They definitely don't shy away of violence. So they don't like each other. At yellow, all of a sudden, there's no bias. There's no judgment of these levels. You essentially just pull things from everywhere. And you can ask big controversial questions at yellow that would offend people that haven't gotten to yellow yet. Ideally, this is where we all want to get to. If the more people we can get into tier 2, the better. So the pitfall of yellow is essentially information overload. You want to know everything. There has to be a logical response to everything, right? At yellow, there has to be an answer. You're trying to find answers to questions that maybe sometimes don't have answers. And again, you're self-centric now. You're an individual, very self-centered, trying to self-actualize into the person you want to be. This is like the pinnacle stage of self-actualization. But then, if you want to go up, which is very uncommon and not many people do with spiral dynamics. It's amazing that they actually even identified this last stage, is you move into what's called turquoise, which again is collectivist or group centered. So turquoise is pretty well, if green was the planet wanting the best for Earth, turquoise is wanting the best for the universe. But it's not just that, it's also understanding that the universe is already in balance, the universe is already in perfect sync. And the only reason it doesn't seem like that to you is because your little individual perspective or your ego wants to achieve certain things, right? But if you can transcend that ego or that voice in your head, you can kind of see that everything is all interconnected, that everything's all one. Everything is a holistic system. And humans play a part in that, animals play a part in that, any alien life plays a part in that, the way planets and space moves, and it's all cosmically aligned essentially. The goal of someone at turquoise is to move into flow with the universe, or to move into sync, to move into a natural being or a depth where they can fully be a part of the universe and also fully be themselves, without bias, without judgment, without any limitations. So they want to really be their authentic self, and they want to live consciously. What I mean by consciously is they want to live in truth. And again, they want to live in flow. They want to be fully aware and fully in sync with how everything is. And that goes in the moment. And this isn't about knowledge, this is about experience. Yellow would be looking at this logically. Turquoise wants to feel it. Turquoise wants to be fully in the moment. Yeah, there's a saying between purple and turquoise that at purple you're in robes and at turquoise you're also in robes. The difference is at turquoise the robes are clean. I can't remember who said that, but it's quite good. About 0.1% of the population are at this stage. That's conservative though. Mainly, it's probably even less than that, to be honest. And turquoise holds like 1% of the global influence. And some examples of turquoise are essentially like, think of the wise sage from the movie, from any movie, who's in sync with the universe and who gives you wisdom and often speaks in riddles. Maybe Yoda from Star Wars is a good one. And yeah, that's essentially spiral dynamics. Really useful model. It's so much deeper in this video, but it's going for quite a long time, so I'd say I'll probably make a follow-up video on every stage because it sounds fun. It's a model I like, so there'll be fun videos to make. So you can use this model for self-development. Again, mainly vertical. You can understand these different layers of developmental psychology and how your worldview and your goals and beliefs are going to change as you climb it. But you could also just stagnate, and you could find a stage you're comfortable with and enjoy and go horizontally or try and actualize the goals you already have. And then maybe one day, if those goals crash down and they don't feel right anymore, you can come back to this model and understand that maybe you've just moved to this next stage and those things are no longer as relevant as they once were. Because see, a lot of people, for example, at Orange, maybe they climb up the hierarchy, they get to the top, they realize it's not wrong, and maybe they even kill themselves or something because that path to happiness didn't turn out to give them what they were hunting. Well, with this, you could say, well, maybe I've moved into green and maybe all this stuff I accumulated no longer serves me. So it's really useful in that way. So you can use this model for lifestyle design, especially if you're at yellow, but wherever you are, you can understand where you are and you can understand what it is you might need at this point or what you might potentially need in the future. Like, for example, I'm very strong in yellow at the moment with a little bit of turquoise and plenty of stuff to integrate in the lower stages. But I'm designing my life in a way where if I move to turquoise, my life will still run quite well. Understand the difference between horizontal and vertical personal development. So, yeah, just keep locking that in. And again, I've written here, horizontal is actualizing your current goals and belief systems. Vertical is transcending those goals and belief systems to grow into a new stage of being. And you should do both. You should be growing horizontally and vertically at the same time. So I hope this model interested you. it's the people it's really going to pull are going to be people who are at yellow, maybe green. That's really where it's going to get you. I think this is a yellow model. I think the people that developed this model were very yellow, and you can see it in the way it's written, in the way it's very open and maybe even triggering if you're below yellow, especially if you're very low, if you're like orange or blue. This model might be very triggering or very uninteresting. And at turquoise, I don't know. This model would probably still be interesting, but you wouldn't take it as literally, because I want to stress that it's just a lens. It's not like humans jump from stage to stage like this. It's just a lens or a way of understanding the world, or individuals or groups or cultures or countries or anything along those lines. It's just one of infinite lenses we can construct to understand this. And you've also got lines of growth, right? So you could be orange in your relationships, you could be yellow in your job, you could be blue, like with your family. It's endlessly complicated. This is just one lens and one way of hopefully understanding the world a little bit better. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, leave me a comment. You know, I want to keep growing this in the algorithm, getting started with this channel, and I just want to keep building it and upload a couple of videos a week and see where it goes. So I wish you all the best, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.